G'day, mate. 40 here. So is that just something that you can decide on your own? Or does that also come to you, right, from other people, right? I decide on. I wager that it's also something that we get from other people. It's not just something that we arbitrarily get to decide on our own. And I think the most talked about story in the United States today is that video of that man just beating up on that female boxer, right? He's got male chromosomes, XY chromosomes, but the U.S. Olympic Committee still regards him as eligible to beat up on a woman who's fighting him. And just incredible outrage over that story right now. It's not like something you see that very often. I mean, being on the right, you're just not particularly ready for the right to start winning at the culture wars. But it seems like over the past 3-4 years, for the first time in my memory, we're consistently seeing the right win on culture wars. And let's go back to this topic of identity. So remember, the liberal perspective on life is that you can choose your own identity, right? You can choose to be male or female. You can choose to be black or white, Latino, Asian, right? I'm 1/16 Chinese, all right? I could choose to be Chinese American. And through the power of your own brain, you can decide your path in life. You can decide your identity in life. You can decide what's right and wrong all on your own. You can recognize and create a particular path for meaning. You develop your own hero system. All right, it all comes back to you. It's autonomous individuals deciding through their own rational faculties who they are and who they want to be, as opposed to the traditional perspective, the conservative perspective, the tribalist perspective, the nationalist perspective, that reason, morality, right and wrong, the path to meaning, and your identity, they all exist outside of you. Your obligations, they exist outside of you, and it is up to you whether or not you want to live up to your obligations. So the liberal left mantra is follow your bliss. The traditional perspective on life is do your duty. Why do you do your duty? Because meaning, purpose, everything that is heroic, the standards for that all lie outside of you. As a traditionalist, as a nationalist, as a tribalist, as a conservative, as a fundamental member of a particular religion, all right, God, religion, morality, purpose, meaning, standards, they all exist outside of you, and it's your obligation to live up to them. Where's my yarmulke? It's right there. And for liberals, all right, meaning, purpose, and identity is something they can just, each individual can decide on his own. Liberalism is a highly individualist perspective. So if Kamala Harris or Barack Obama say they're black, then you treat them as black, right? Because the individual gets to decide these things for himself. When I look at Barack Obama, when I look at Kamala Harris, I don't think of them as black. And I suppose under enough social bombardment, I will learn to watch my words in public. But when it's just me and the images flickering on my screen, they don't seem black to me. They don't look black to me. I'm fine if they identify as black. I am not fine if a man chooses to identify as a woman. So the liberal elite leftist perspective is if a man decides to identify as a woman, then you have to treat him as a woman. Every prominent Democrat believes that trans women, meaning men, biological men who decide to identify as women, every major Democrat, including Josh Shapiro, that amazing centrist governor in Pennsylvania, believes that trans women are women. How well does that hold up after you see that battering that poor female boxer took from a man at the Olympics earlier today? Just incredible levels of outrage that I see all over the internet, and it gives me hope that all is not lost. All right, there's a lot of decency still with people, and I like what real Donald Trump has put on his Truth Social, that I would not allow men to participate in women's sports. Right, Matt Walsh says it's worth taking a moment to appreciate just how thoroughly we've won on the trans issue. 5 years ago, most people were terrified to vocally object to any of this madness. Trans activists were getting their way everywhere and in every area of society. Today, the voices objecting is significantly louder than those supporting it. Laws have been passed in dozens of states outlawing child mutilation and mandating sex segregation in sports. Right? I think this is a good thing. Democrat politicians are embarrassed to talk about trans issues at all. Corporations are suddenly shy about waving the trans flag. Medical organizations are finally starting to admit that transitioning children is a bad idea. Anyone who claims trans women are women is guaranteed to get dogpiled online and mocked. The trans agenda has lost battle after battle. Trans activists are a punchline. They are ridiculed and they are not respected. Conservatives have never flipped the script on a cultural issue this quickly and completely. I think that's a great point, because in reality, you don't get to decide your identity all on your own, right? Male versus female, first of all, is a matter of sex. It's not a matter of gender. Society decides gender. Male versus female is overwhelmingly a matter of chromosomes. You cannot change your sex. All you can do is mutilate yourself. So you can try to put on whatever identity you want, all right? You can be a man and pretend to be a woman, but you're going to have a heck of a time if society does not support you, right? I converted to Orthodox Judaism. If all the Orthodox Jews I encountered said, I don't count you as Jewish, you're not Jewish to me, I would be unable to keep up with my narrative, because from the realist perspective, not just the conservative, traditional, tribal, nationalist perspective, but from a realist perspective, your identity does not belong to you only. Your identity, like your reputation, belongs in the minds of other people, right? You would not be able to perpetuate the idea that you're a man who has transformed into a woman if nobody else supports that narrative, right? You have to have support for your narratives, or they drop away. Are women taking competence for granted, or are they willing to trade competence for DEI? Depends on the woman. The more traditional the woman, the more likely she is to not be down with the diversity, equity, inclusion agenda. So whatever your narrative is, if you think you're Jewish, but no one in the Jewish community supports that identity, you're going to have a heck of a time keeping it up. Because we all have to have support for our narratives, for our identities, and for our reputation, right? My reputation does not belong to me. My reputation exists in your head, and your head, and your head, and your head, and also in part to me. I think the number one goal in my life over the past 4 years or so has been to strengthen and develop my own reputation with myself. So that is very important. Your own reputation with yourself, what's popularly called self-esteem, that's incredibly important. It gives you unbelievable amounts of strength and perseverance and bravery and clarity. If you have a good reputation with yourself, you can be an authentic person who moves through life in an effective way. All right, if you have a good reputation with yourself. But you also have to build a reputation with others. If you think you are a terrific worker, but you're getting no support for that at work, right, you're not going to be able to keep up this self-reputation you have that you're a great worker. If you think you're an amazing lover, but no member of the opposite sex who's ever been with you thinks the same thing, right, you're not going to be able to keep up with that perspective. Right? We all need support for our identity, for our reputation, and for our narratives, our most important narratives. We have to have support from other people, or they're just going to fall to the side. All right, let's check in for a quick bit from the...
Raymond Biden made a surprise public appearance today. Yay.
Yes, and naturally, Laura, back to form, he battled the teleprompter to announce the return of hostages from Russia before taking his own hostage.
All the cases of hostages being wrongfully detained, which were inherently, well, we inherit them from the prior administration. The 13th birthday of Mary Moray. Come here. You all know we have a tradition in the Biden family. We sing happy birthday. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Miriam. Happy birthday to you. Remember, no serious guys till you're 30.
Good Lord. And remember, no presidential runs after 80, Laura. That was the other message he forgot to mention there. You know.
So just thinking, for 4 years, the Democrats and the news media hid Kamala Harris's, hid Joe Biden's infirmity. All right, this is a man who's frequently having senile moments, and that was largely hidden from the American public, denied by the mainstream media and by our elites and by the Democrats. Now they're hiding Kamala Harris's infirmity from us. Right? Kamala Harris's infirmity is insecurity. She is so insecure that she can only perform well when she is scripted. Right? She has not taken questions since she has risen to be the Democrats' presumptive nominee for President of the United States. She hasn't had a news conference. She hasn't had an interview. She hasn't gone off script. Right? She has an infirmity that she's terribly insecure, and she is unable to think on the fly effectively. She's unable to take responsibility for her own mistakes. She's unable to maintain staff because she treats people below her terribly. She is a terrible manager, and she just looks ridiculous when anything goes off script, which it inevitably will as a president of the United States. So just thinking, the Democrats hid Joe Biden's infirmity for 3.5 years, and now they've hidden Kamala Harris's infirmity of breathtaking levels of insecurity for 10 days. And there's a good chance they'll be have to hide it for another 90 days until the election, right? I would not be surprised if Kamala Harris dodged any aggressive questioning between now and election day. And so the Democrats, the news media, will probably do everything they can to promote her and to protect her. But eventually it will come out how insecure this woman is, how ill-equipped she is to be president of the United States. And we'll have another horror show like we have right now, where we've got a president essentially missing. We don't even know who's operating the country now, because Joe Biden consistently seems so out of it. Right, Steve Saylor has a great column. How dare Donald Trump doubt Kamala? Those of inferior identities like Trump should never question their superiors like Kamala. So in the liberal left perspective, every individual gets to choose his own identity, his own path, the meaning, his own purpose in life. But some identities are sacred and others are not. And so the essence of wokeism is that certain identities, certain groups, such as blacks and trans, do not get to be publicly criticized. They are exempt from criticism. So let's get a quick burst here.
And apparently, even Don Lemon appeared at a Black Men for Harris event.
I'm happy to be in an independent space where I don't have to worry about the corporate overlords now, where I can stand up for democracy, where I can say who I'm supporting. The worst things that I hear about Kamala Harris comes from white men, straight white men.
Oh. Well, after hearing your angle, Laura, I guess that makes you a straight white man. I mean, what is he talking about? Look, I was surprised to see Don Lemon supporting Kamala Harris. After all, she is 59 years old, way past her prime in his estimation, remember.
Nikki Haley isn't in her prime. Sorry. When a woman is considered to be in her prime in her 20s and 30s and maybe 40s.
Prime for what?
It depends. I mean, it's just like prime. If you look it up, it'll say, if you Google when is a woman in her prime, it'll say 20s, 30s, and 40s.
Wow, red-pilled Don Lemon. All right, great Steve Saylor blog post. News article, New York Times. Trump remarks on Harris evoke a haunting and unsettling history. White America has long sought to define racial categories and who can belong to them. What group has not sought to define who gets to belong to them? What group has not tried to categorize and define the world around it? Why should white people be exempt from this universal human tendency? I can't imagine any group not wanting to define who gets to belong to them. and not wanting to categorize the wider world around them. But to the New York Times, this is a haunting and unsettling matter that white people are like every other people in the world, right? They get to decide who belongs to them, and they get to categorize the wider world. Since when? Seriously, did white people get asked their opinion about the Biden administration's creation of a whole new racial category for the 2030 census called Middle Eastern and North African? Did I miss it when Jared Taylor from American Renaissance was invited on all the news shows to talk about whether this flight from white maneuver by the Democrats is good for the whites? Or when South Asians engaged in flight from white and got themselves reclassified from white Caucasian on the 1970 census to Asian on the 1980 census, and thus eligible for affirmative action for cheap loans from the Small Business Administration for minority business development and affirmative action in government contracting. I don't recall anyone asking the opinion of white people at all. Same for the creation of the ethnicity category on the 1970 census, making Hispanics into Schrodinger's whites eligible for racial affirmative action, but without having to admit that they aren't totally of 100% blue-blooded conquistador ancestry. Was the National Association for the Advancement of White People invited to testify at congressional hearings on these proposals? Then we have another news report. The audience of black journalists was prepared for a combative exchange well before Donald Trump took the stage Wednesday for an interview at their annual gathering in Chicago. Yet when Mr. Trump, minutes in, began questioning Vice President Kamala Harris's racial identity, there was an instant ripple of reaction, a low rumble that grew into a roar of disapproval. I didn't know that she was black until a number of years ago, when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black. So I don't know, is she Indian or is she black? Mr. Trump said of Harris, whose mother was Indian American and whose father is black. Back to Steve Saylor's column. Right, California political legend Willie Brown says that in the mid-1990s, he introduced his mistress Kamala Harris to Donald Trump on a flight they took on Trump's jet. Right, Kamala Harris got her start in politics as Willie Brown's mistress. So Trump learns that the name is Kamala and thinks, okay, she's Indian.
And turned her into the pantsuit messiah. The Harris sugar high was the media's excuse to bury the biggest story of the election, Trump dodging an assassin's bullet. But yesterday, everything changed. The talk of the town again was Donald Trump, who knows better than anybody that if you want to change a narrative, you create a little controversy. 45 RSVP'd to the Black Journalist Convention and played the race card.
Do you believe that Vice President Kamala Harris is only on the ticket because she is a black woman?
Well, I can say, no, I think it's maybe a little bit different. She was always of Indian heritage, and she was only promoting Indian heritage. I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black. So I don't know, is she Indian or is she black?
She has always identified as a black woman. She went to a historically black college.
I respect either one, but she obviously doesn't, because she was Indian all the way, and then all of a sudden she made a turn and she became a black person.
Just to be clear, sir, do you believe that she is...
I think somebody should look into that too when you continue in a very hostile, nasty tone.
It's a direct question, sir. Do you believe that Vice President Kamala Harris is a DEI hire, as some Republicans have said?
I really don't know. Could be.
Last night, we said we had no idea how this was going to play. But the dust is starting to settle, and we're picking up a few clues. The media barely covered Trump's comments today. If these comments were supposed to be devastating to the Trump campaign, the media would be playing it every hour. If this was so explosive, why didn't Kamala capitalize on it? She put out a bland paper statement last night, but never brought it up again. They haven't cut an ad. Her surrogates aren't going wall to wall. A Democrat doesn't want to talk about race and play the victim and call Trump racist? That's strange. I wonder why Kamala is avoiding this. Does it have something to do with white dudes for Harris? And why isn't Kamala talking about this egregious attack on DEI? Maybe the black community sees Kamala different than we think. I don't know. Maybe this issue of Kamala's race isn't as potent as we think. And that's a good thing, because this shouldn't be about race. And that's exactly how Trump, whether he even knew what he was doing or not, shifted the debate. Everybody's now talking about what Trump needs to do to win. And what he touched on in his reference to Kamala's mixed race, she uses this side sometimes, the other side the other time for political opportunity, gets to the heart of Kamala Harris. She's fake. And there's nothing wrong with people with mixed backgrounds identifying in different ways at different times. It's natural. But politicians are phony. And Kamala is a career politician who goes where the wind blows and changes positions day to day, changes accents. She does what's easy in the moment so she can't get pinned down. Everybody knows people like Kamala Harris. She's the kind of girl who's nice to your face, talks behind your back. She's someone who calls you a racist and then joins your ticket. Whatever Trump says, he'll say it to your face. Whoever you are, no matter what you look like. That's real.
He may not have sound like a used car salesman, which most politicians do. See, what a lot of people fail to realize is the reason why MAGA supports Trump is because we like the fact that he's not presidential. We like the fact that he's real. And that's what we appreciate. We need authenticity in this White House.
This is why Hillary lost. Voters didn't like her because she was phony. WikiLeaks revealed that Hillary had two positions on an issue, a public position and a private position. Same thing with Kamala, except she doesn't even have a position. She literally just said she wants to get rid of your guns, your health care, oil drilling, and ICE. And 3 months before the election, her campaign puts out a statement that says, nah, she doesn't believe in any of that. What? The first female president is going to be a woman with no principles and no policies? I don't know, guys. Her California sponsor, Willie Brown, is advising Kamala Harris that she ought to embrace her hazy ideological categorization because if she keeps people continually guessing, then she can adjust the interpretation of your guess every time she sees you. How fake is Kamala? She goes by Mamala, but behind closed doors, she makes her interns cry. She won't let them look her in the eye. She says she's tough on crime as a prosecutor, but crime exploded in California. She bailed out BLM rioters. She just cut a plea deal with the 9/11 mastermind. Kamala says she's just one of the girls. But when she ran for Senate, she treated her campaign fund like a personal checking account to fund a life of luxury. She just campaigned, remember, on democracy. Now it's freedom is the slogan. But she fired you for not getting vaxxed. She censored your speech. She's trying to put her opponent in prison. What kind of brave girl boss hides from the mainstream media? She hasn't done an interview in a month. A lot's happened in a month. Trump's doing interviews with CNN, black journalists, libertarians, and they're hiding Harris, who suddenly went from the most unpopular VP in history to a cultural phenomenon.
All right, why are they hiding Kamala Harris? Why were they hiding Joe Biden for 3.5 years? Because both suffer from disabling disabilities. All right, Joe Biden frequently lapses into senility, and Kamala Harris has crippling insecurity. I read all the campaign books about the 2020 election. I read through a biography of Kamala Harris. I read the main news articles about her, and there's a consistent theme. Wherever she goes, wherever she builds a staff, the staff very quickly turn against her because she does not do her homework. She is relatively low in conscientiousness, and therefore she constantly gets into embarrassing scrapes. And when she does get embarrassed, she then blames her staff. She's unable to take responsibility because she feels so insecure. And that's why she freezes, and that's why she does all the weird hand motions and the nervous cackles, because she is deeply insecure and is unable to simply be present with what's going on and react like a normal person.
Who doesn't talk to the media? I'm not buying it. You don't hide from journalists who want you to win. She's afraid. They're protecting her. She's not a leader. All this hype online for Harris, we found Democrats paying people $150 cash a post to make Harris look cool. How does Harris paying for clout make you better off? People see through it.
Tell me what appeals to you about Trump.
His business acumen.
Wow, I'm just thinking, how much would the Democrats have to pay me to write posts making Kamala look cool? Little more than 150.
When Donald Trump was president, we were all doing a lot better financially. He's always been a business icon, so why wouldn't we want that business icon to be president?
And he had this to say about Harris.
I think she hasn't done anything worth mentioning.
What would you have wanted to see Vice President Harris accomplish that she has not?
I would have liked her to kind of bring a calm to the border. The border crisis has gotten out of hand.
In a weird roundabout way, Trump's Kamala ain't black comments are forcing him to bring the campaign back around to issues, to substance, to records. It's what the country wants. Maybe he planted a few seeds with the fake race remark, but people are now curious. Who is Kamala? Not so much about who her mom and dad are. We know her mom's Indian, her dad's Jamaican, and she grew up in Canada and has presented herself in different ways to different audiences, which is fine. But she's never fought for you. She's only fought for herself, and that's fake.
The contrast could not be more stark. On the one hand, you have a radical left puppet candidate who is fake, fake, fake. And on the other hand, you have a president who will fight, fight, fight for America.
Former Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy's here. Kevin McCarthy, when you saw that...
Okay, let's get back to this great Steve Saylor blog post today on New York Times and the media getting outraged at Donald Trump's remarks yesterday. They talked about Willie Brown. That's how Kamala Harris got her start in politics as his mistress. She was 29, he was 60. So back to the mainstream journalism. The moment was shocking. Not shocking for me. I suspect it was not shocking for you, but it was shocking for those with a particular hero system, all right, that of the conventional liberal left morality. But for those who have followed Mr. Trump's divisive language, it was hardly surprising. I don't see why it's particularly divisive. The former president has a history of using race to pit groups of Americans against one another. Oh, unlike the affirmative action crowd, right? Unlike the left, unlike liberals, they never use race to pit groups of Americans against one another. The only thing that holds the liberal left Democratic Party coalition together is hatred of whites. Right? That's the only thing that gays and Muslims and Latinos and Chinese and Koreans and the various components of the Democratic coalition have in common. Right? The only thing that unites them is fear and negative feelings towards the white majority. So, former president has a history of using race to pit groups of Americans against one another, amplifying a strain of racial politics that has risen as a generation of black politicians has ascended. In contrast, notes Steve Saylor, to the New York Times, which never writes about how Karens manifest white privilege. So it's time for a racial reckoning against white supremacy. The audacity of Mr. Trump, a white man, questioning how much a black woman truly belongs to black America was particularly incendiary. Why is it particularly incendiary? It is normal, natural, and healthy to figure out, is someone one of us or not? And then if they're not one of us, how would you categorize them? Every people in the world tries to figure out who is one of us, and then how would we categorize those who are not of us? How much of a threat are outgroups? So why is it that white people should be exempt from this universal human reaction to life? Is this person one of us? If they're not one of us, how dangerous are they to us? What category do they belong in? And it evoked an ugly history in this country in which white America is often declared the racial categories that define citizens. Or does not every majority, create the categories for its particular country? Ms. Harris has embraced her dual racial identities, right? We all have dual identities. Your husbands, your wives, your workers, your bosses, your Christian, Jewish, male, female, Los Angelino, a resident of Montreal, right? We all have dual identities, but we're going to have a heck of a time maintaining any identity if we get no support from other people. Right? Identity, like your reputation, is not just something you can unilaterally stake out and demand that other people support you on your identity. Right? You have to have some significant social support for your claims of identity, or you're just going to run out of strength and courage to keep affirming an identity that nobody else affirms. So Steve Saylor says Kamala may seem exotic at first, half Tamil Brahmin, half Jamaican mulatto middle class, but in truth, she's just a basic old sorority sister. And in 2019, Donald Trump Jr. shared a social media post from an alt-right personality that falsely claimed Ms. Harris was not black enough to be discussing the plight of black Americans during a primary debate. Well, plenty of blacks did not consider Barack Obama black or black enough. That's why he lost his first election. And plenty of African Americans do not consider Kamala Harris an African American because she's not African American, right? Her father was mulatto. Her father would pass for white in Jamaica, right? So her father was white in Jamaica and considered black in the United States. So in 2004, we have this long New York Times news article on the debate over who deserves affirmative action, right? Do people from Jamaica deserve affirmative action?
Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro is getting blown up. Shapiro is accused of covering up sexual harassment in his office. And now the National Women's Defense League is urging Harris not to pick him. One of Shapiro's closest advisors was hit with a sexual harassment allegation. Then the governor's office paid a woman $300,000 to make it go away. Did Shapiro pay hush money to win an election? Because we were told that's a big no-no. Could this derail Kamala's VP process? We have no idea. She was planning on holding her first rally with her VP in Philly, Shapiro's state, on Tuesday. Was this a dirty Democrat leak by another VP contender? Probably. We'll let you know how it shakes out. The new Olympic sport, men beating up women.
Yeah, that's the number one story on social media today. So, yeah, back to this great Steve Saylor article. So, yeah, there used to be a serious discussion. Why should reparations or affirmative action go to non-American blacks? All right, it should not be reserved for the descendants of slaves. Right? Perhaps the majority, perhaps 2/3 of Harvard's quote-unquote black undergraduates are not African-American, right? They're from West Indies, or their children are biracial couples, right? You can say on your census, even if you're only 1/16 black or 1/16 Asian, you can still claim black or Asian on your identity. But shortly after this 2004 article, Harvard Law School graduate Barack Obama, half white and half Kenyan with no ancestors who were American slaves, emerged as the great black hope of the Democratic Party. So this controversy was driven from the mainstream media to not confuse the Democrats' return to the White House in 2008. Like many of Mr. Trump's more provocative statements, back to the latest New York Times article, the comments conveyed several unsettling ideas at once, all of them somewhat open to interpretation. So Kamala Harris's father split from her mother at age 5. She was overwhelmingly raised by her mother. She was overwhelmingly raised in Indian culture, not black culture, right? So Dr. Donald Harris, a communist Marxist economist, got tenure at Stanford University. He comes from Jamaica's mulatto middle class, and they are not called black in Jamaica, right? They are called white in Jamaica. Now, Americans have a one-drop rule, generally speaking, for lumping people into either black or white. And so Americans don't necessarily understand Caribbean and Latin American gradients, which go back to Spanish times. So on Kamala Harris's birth certificate, her father entered his race as Jamaican, which is probably a sensible way around the problem of Americans lacking a vocabulary to describe mulattoes like himself. So the point of this New York Times news article is that Kamala Harris is a woman, black, Asian, and most importantly, a Democrat. So she has far more Pokemon point privileges than an inferior like the male white Republican Donald Trump, who should never dare to ask any questions about his social superiors. If you want to get a good reading on Kamala Harris, there's a good book by Peter Schweitzer, Profiles in Corruption, Abuse of Power by America's Progressive Elite. It came out in 2020. Got a long chapter on Kamala Harris. Begins, President Barack Obama stood in front of an array of well-heeled donors in a private home in super-rich Atherton, California. He'd just been re-elected 5 months earlier. He was touting his White House accomplishments. And then he praised California Attorney General Kamala Harris, who was also in the room. He praised her dedication and brilliance and added she also happens to be by far the best-looking Attorney General in the country. So Kamala and Obama have a long history, right? Harris first supported Obama when he was running for the Senate in Illinois back in 2004, and that they were constantly fundraising for each other. And Harris is widely admired in progressive circles as the female Obama, because she does come across, when she's got a script, as smooth, polished, and confident. She's worked hard to cultivate a celebrity mystique while fiercely guarding her privacy. The rising star in the Democratic Party has a taste for expensive things like Manolo Blahnik shoes and Chanel handbags. She paints herself as a gritty lawyer who's climbing the greasy pole by her own strength and determination. She positions herself as smart on crime, which is the title of a book that she published. The reality of her rise to prominence is far more complicated, right? She got into politics as Willie Brown's mistress. She's closely tied to Willie Brown's corrupt political machine. And investigations into her tenure as a prosecutor raised disturbing questions about her use of criminal statutes in a highly selective manner, frequently protecting her friends, financial partners, and supporters. She covers up information concerning major allegations of criminal misconduct, some involving child molestation. Right. Her entry into politics began with a date. In 1994, she met Willie Brown, who was the second most powerful man in California politics as the Speaker of the State Assembly. He was married, but she began dating him. He was married in 1958. He remains married today. He was 60 when he began dating Kamala, who was 29. Willie Brown was 2 years older than her own father. Her affair with Willie Brown was the talk of San Francisco in 1994. She was Willie Brown's mistress for about 2 years. Kamala's mother defended her daughter's decision. Why shouldn't she have gone out with Willie Brown? He was a player. And what could Willie Brown expect from her in the future? He has not much life left. Willie Brown immediately began pulling levers for Kamala Harris that boosted both her career and put money in her pocket. He rewarded her with appointments to state commissions that paid well and did not require confirmation by the legislature, put Kamala on the State Unemployment Insurance Appeals Board, later the California Medical Assistance Commission. All right, so she was earning $200,000 from those two positions. He gave her a new BMW, and he gave her access to his vast network of political supporters, donors, and sponsors. Soon she was publicly arm in arm with Willie Brown in the most elite circles of San Francisco, including the most lavish parties and celebrity galas. Willie Brown ran for mayor of San Francisco, and Kamala was regularly by his side. But once he was elected to the mayor, they split up. Apparently, Willie Brown decided to split. Then Kamala Harris started dating another prominent famous man, television talk show host Montel Williams. Willie Brown helped her run for district attorney, essentially turned over his machine to her, and she was able to outraise funds dramatically more than the incumbent district attorney. And then she rewarded her supporters by not prosecuting them. And Willie Brown used his pull to get all sorts of city workers to show up to her rallies. Right? Various union workers were told by their bosses to attend campaign events for Kamala Harris. Willie Brown pulled those strings for her. When she took the oath of office in January 2004, she decided not to take the oath on the Bible, but on a copy of the Bill of Rights. There were two benedictions, one from a Hindu priest in Sanskrit, the other from an African-American minister. The American national anthem was played, as well as the national black anthem. Then after the swearing in, there was sitar music and soul, and Indian food was provided. So she hit all the bases. All right, this boxing story is the number one story on social media today.
This week we saw one of the biggest scandals in Olympic history, and nobody's talking about it. Italian boxer Angela Carini, in the blue, squared off against Algerian boxer Emain Khalif. But Khalif is genetically male.
Khalif looking to come with the straight punches to the body of Carini. Nice little lead up from Khalif.
And the poor girl just gets hit like she's never been hit before.
Carini just asking to get her head guard tightened in.
Just getting beaten down by this man.
Solid straight right hand from
And she
Khalif
gives
there.
up.
The Italian woman quit the fight after taking those shots, then fell to her knees and cried. She said Khalif threw harder punches than she's ever felt before. Makes sense. Men have 162 more punching power percentage on average than women. But how did a boxer with male DNA compete against a woman in the Olympics? It's complicated, they say. Khalif, they say, has identified as a woman his whole life. They say there's no indication Khalif is trans. But last year, Khalif was DQ'd from competing in a different
He sure doesn't look like a woman.
boxing championship after testing positive for high testosterone.
But I'm not an expert. Just because he's got male chromosomes doesn't look remotely female. Who am I to say he doesn't look like a woman?
And the male chromosome XY. The Olympics says that's okay.
These athletes, boxers, are entirely eligible. They are women on their passport. They have competed for many years, and I actually think it's not helpful to start stigmatizing people who take part in sport like this.
So the Olympics thinks it's fair for a genetic male to punch a woman so hard in the face she quits and cries, as long as it says female on her passport. And they're going to let this guy keep beating up women in Paris, and they're just going to hand him a gold medal for it? Next summer, the Olympics in L.A., in California, Kamala's home state. Are they going to allow that? Because today, the new Biden-Harris Title IX rules went into effect, allowing men to change in girls' locker rooms and take scholarships meant for girls. And if you call somebody by the wrong pronoun, could be a hate crime. Women's sports are being wrecked. Girls are in physical danger, and Kamala needs to answer for this because those are her policies. But reporters won't ask her, and the media won't report it. Donald Trump says when he's president, he's gutting the trans rules.
I can tell you one thing. Men will not be playing in women's sports. When you look at this young lady from a different country, what difference does it make? Just look and say, oh, man, what hit me? I just got hit by a horse. And she just, I've never seen that, were 2 jabs. And she said, I've had enough.
Riley Gaines is an Outkick.com host, ambassador for the Independent Women's Forum, and author of Swimming.
So you should see what happens when you've got a trans here spiking a volleyball so hard that it leaves a female volleyball player paralyzed with brain damage after the trans opponent cackled with delight after knocking her to the ground. So Peyton McNabb was 17, this a cute blonde girl, when a ball spiked by a trans opponent with force struck her in the face, threw her to the ground, shut off her consciousness. Right, the trans player cackled in delight after sending it to the floor, as did other players in the opposite team. She's left with brain damage and paralysis on her right side. It's difficult for her to walk without falling. Let's look at this. Just awful. Right, just vicious, just deadly. Right, why are you allowing men to participate in women's sports? Right, permanently damaged by what's happened. Right, back to Kamala Harris. Right, so as district attorney, she had enormous discretion in which cases to prosecute and which not to, and consistently throughout her tenure, she did not prosecute cases that were aligned with Willie Brown and his machine. Right? So she often talks about fighting for those victimized by sex crimes, but she did nothing about sexual abuse of children by priests. Right? During her decade-and-a-half tenure as a chief prosecutor, Kamala Harris failed to prosecute one single case of priest abuse, and her office hid vital records on abuses that had occurred despite the protests of victims' groups. So her predecessor as San Francisco DA was aware of and prosecuted numerous Catholic priests on sexual misconduct against children charges, and he'd been building case files for even more prosecutions. but Kamala Harris refused to prosecute a single one because the church had ties in with Willie Brown's organization. So Kamala Harris consistently refused to prosecute people who were tied into Willie Brown's machine. And she would cover up records of the abuse. And she would claim, we're not interested in selling out our victims to look good in the paper, which was a bold claim coming from Kamala Harris during the 2003 campaign. A woman who was tortured by her boyfriend with a hot iron blasted Kamala Harris for citing her story during a campaign debate. I'm appalled by Kamala Harris referring to my case. Harris is supposedly for victims. She never consulted before using my case. But when it comes to the priest abuse scandal, the opposite was true. Victims groups wanted documents released. Kamala Harris stopped it. They were outraged by her actions. She consistently acted in favor of priest abusers. She consistently acted in favor of abusers who were tied in with Willie Brown's machine. And her actions ran completely contrary to her public image as a fighter for victims, particularly for children. So transparency tends to embolden victims of priestly abuse. But Kamala Harris threw in to protect priestly abusers. She was California Attorney General from 2011 to 2017. She was San Francisco District Attorney from 2004 to 2011. Never brought one single documented case forward against an abusive priest. Right? During this time, at least 50 other cities charged priests in sexual abuse cases, but not Kamala Harris. So Kamala Harris consistently favored Willie Brown's machine and its supporters. So all sorts of people were arrested for all sorts of heinous things, but if they were tied in with Willie Brown and his machine, she declined to prosecute. You had the most reckless behavior, and she would decline to prosecute it. There was Ricardo Ramirez, ran a cement and concrete business called Pacific Cement. Right, 1/3 of the public works projects in San Francisco used his company. And he was a big funder of Willie Brown's political machine. Right. He consistently cut dangerous corners threatening San Francisco public safety. He used inferior and cheaper recycled concrete on major projects like the Golden Gate Bridge, parking garages, light rail projects. These are massive projects where structural integrity was key. The half-mile stretch of the Bay Bridge's western approach, the parking garage at Golden Gate Park, wastewater treatment plant in Burlingame, the Municipal Railways 3rd Street Light Rail project, right? All these projects required solid concrete. Ramirez used inferior recycled concrete, which contains recycled debris rather than hard rock. It's prone to water penetration. It's more likely to crack and wear quickly. Recycled concrete is acceptable for decorative work, but for major load-bearing projects like roads and bridges, it is unsafe. And he ran this scam for years. When he was finally caught, Harris didn't seriously prosecute him, got a plea deal where he simply pled guilty to illegally storing waste oil. He agreed to a year in home detention and a payment of $427,000 in fines. San Francisco officials were absolutely mystified why Kamala Harris would decline to prosecute. But the guy that she might have gone after was a good friend and donor to Willie Brown. And you see this pattern throughout Kamala Harris's career as San Francisco District Attorney and then as California Attorney General. She would not prosecute those who were tied into her funders and her interests. So she started dating Doug Emhoff. They became engaged in March 2014, and he made his career, and his law firm made a career in defending Herbalife. So in 2015, you had attorney generals from 14 other states, including New York, investigating Herbalife. Harris, who worked with these attorney generals on other issues, did not participate. Right? She declined to go after Herbalife. The FTC won a $200 million settlement against Herbalife. Kamala Harris, as California Attorney General, never investigated it. Right? Los Angeles Times noted her conspicuous failure to participate in the action. and Herbalife was a client of her husband's law firm. So whenever she had targets of prosecution who were tied into her husband or to the Willie Brown machine or to her donors, Kamala Harris just consistently left them off the hook. Right. That's a track record.
A Secret Service whistleblower is telling Senator Hawley that that guy personally directed that Secret Service agents who do threat assessments at events be cut. The whistleblower says those agents should have been at Trump's Butler rally doing threat assessments, and they were cut by that Secret Service director, Ronald Rowe. Some of these Secret Service threat assessment agents had been warning about security problems for months leading up to the Butler rally, but were ignored. Why? If those agents were at the Butler rally, Crooks would have been in cuffs the second he was spotted with the rangefinder. Not only did Secret Service cut these special agents for Trump's Butler rally, the Secret Service hasn't even called the locals who were providing backup that day.
Secret Service has never talked to any of our people either before the rally that day or to this moment, has ever talked to us in regards to what our actions were that day. Secret Service has not talked to us at all about the incident.
You've not talked directly to the Secret Service, then Director Cheadle, Acting Director Ronald Rowe, they've not reached out to you, neither one of them?
None of them.
They're doing an investigation into an attempted assassination, and the Secret Service hasn't even called the locals. Not even out of curiosity. Like, what the hell happened, guys? That's evidence of a cover-up. Former presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy joins me now. Vivek, another lie. Lie after lie after lie.
Okay, I read the new book by Elle Reeve. Here's the super dramatic title. Black Pill, How I Witnessed the Darkest Corners of the Internet Come to Life, Poison Society, and Capture American Politics. Did you know that the alt-right captured American politics? I wasn't aware of that. So her new book just came out. Here are some excerpts. You can dabble in racism, hang out on racist websites, read fascist literature. Oh my God, did you know that you have the ability to read fascist literature and later come back to the normal world? But when you use your real name in the movement, you have passed the point of no return. You can quit, but you can't leave. No one will forget what you've done. Well, plenty of people have quit and plenty of people have left. Richard Hanania, for one. So Richard Hanania admitted to his past writing some provocative things on race for various alt-right publications, and he went ahead, had his major book published by HarperCollins, I believe, a few months ago. Richard Hanania is still a pundit in good standing. So what Elle Reeves is writing here is simply not true. The alt-right movement takes away your friends and gives you new ones, but they don't really like you, and they'll turn on you the moment you become a liability or cringe, an embarrassment. Well, it depends on who you are. I mean, how much clarity and inner strength that you have. The movement does not take away all your friends. And they'll turn on you depending on how you conduct yourself. After the movement ruins you, it will laugh at you. You deserve it. You were never really good enough, but the movement had fun while it lasted. Well, there are many different people in the movement, and some of them will behave badly, and some of them will behave gentlemanly. At the center of the movement is a group of old men. Oh my God, old men. Old men. Is there anything so creepy and horrible as old men? The old men provide the money, but there is never enough money to do much of anything. Guess what? Old men provide the money for all sorts of left-wing causes too. But she's not going to go after them for that. Older people tend to have more financial resources than younger people who are usually spending every spare dollar they have to take care of their family. The old men provide the money, but there's never enough money to do much of anything, and the old men are always pushing the young men to find a new source. When the wealthy inventor Walter Kistler developed an interest in race science in his later years, one of his aides told me a significant part of his job was to stand between Kistler and the grifters like Richard Spencer, who wanted to extract money from him. He was a childlike genius, brilliant but naive, easily manipulable. We were all policemen because Walter's checkbook would be in his pocket whoever walked in, he said, okay, here is a check. So the older men offered validation. They had overlapping clubs and conferences, and when a young man gets an invitation, it's a sign he has promise. One of these old men was Bill Regnery. Richard Spencer calls these old men vampires. All right, so when you become dependent on people, it's very likely that you'll grow to resent them. So Bill Regnery funded Richard Spencer for years. They see something that is alive and they want to go suck its blood, says Richard Spencer. Then the second they don't think it's alive or that it's objectively dead, they want to move on to something else. Bill Regnery was Richard Spencer's chief vampire and backed him for a decade. All right, so Bill Regnery financially backs Richard Spencer for a decade, and in response, he gets called a vampire. When Regnery died in the summer of 2021, Richard Spencer did not go to the funeral. The old men cultivate young men to be public faces for the movement. They give them just enough praise to get them hooked and working for more. Well, do the young men have any responsibility on their own? Are they just simple pawns in the hands of these old men? Matt Parrott mentioned he was antisocial. He testified he was an introvert. It's really hard not to be yourself after several hours of that kind of drilling. That really boils you down, talking about his drilling at the hands of El Reeve. Tested the waters with one of my favorite questions. Are you left-handed? Parrott says he was. Matt Heimbach was left-handed too. My God, if you're left-handed, you're more likely to be alt-right. I asked Parrott what he thought of the ubiquity of the word autiste in white nationalism. It was like whispering the secret password in a fairy tale. The whole side of a mountain opened up. He said he'd been diagnosed with Asperger's in the 90s and that Matt Heimbach had too. So, yeah, there are a lot of autistes in Antifa and many radical left and communist movements, as well as in the alt-right. The movement will get you punched, sued, jailed, divorced, bankrupt, but it will never let you go. Matt Heimbach had a round face with thick black hair and eyebrows, and he was always grinning, but underneath it was a seething anger. So, again, you have this willing helplessness by many people in dissident circles, where they don't want to take responsibility for their own choices, and just all these bad things happen to them, and it wasn't anything that they did. My biggest advice to people in the movement is don't leave because there's no point, Heimbach said. You're already in, your life is screwed. Well, not really. You can leave and build a good life. It will leave you with no one to confide in but the journalists who've exposed what you've done. Well, then maybe you shouldn't have burned bridges with everyone in your life, such as family. Matt Heimbach has been blackpilled, trapped in a nihilistic hopelessness that the only thing to look forward to was to watch the world burn. Well, I see this nihilistic hopelessness among many people on the radical right and the radical left, right? People who are losing in real life, marginalized losers, people who don't have anything going on, people who are passive, people who aren't building up a career, who aren't building up their intellectual interests, who aren't building up a place in their community, who aren't building up a family. People who are just losing in real life, right? It's very tempting to them to develop this alternate reality online where they can feel like a hero. I reminded Matt Heimbach that quitting the movement might provide some benefits that he hadn't considered. When white nationalists kill people, they tend to kill each other. I said quitting would reduce his risk of being one of those killed. Well, your odds of being killed by a white nationalist are about the same as your odds of being hit by lightning. Matt Heimbach was fired from McDonald's after management discovered he'd been a professional racist. He read me his termination letter and said, they never forgive you. They never forgive you. There's no expiration date for how long your life will be ruined. Yeah, there is an American naivete that there's always a second chance, when in reality, you will make some inevitable choices usually by your early to mid-20s that will forever shape the rest of your life. Right? There's no coming back from certain decisions. There's no coming back fully, right? You can recover some decency in your life, but if you make bad choices with your marriage, with your career, right, with how you treat people, right, you're going to pay a permanent price. Yeah, odds of being an under-earner are quite high if you're into radical politics. Matt Heimbach's voice had more edge than usual. You get to a certain point where everything is just like that Springsteen song, Glory Days. You just sit around like, man, remember 2015? Yeah, on the other hand, you could try to build something great from your life. It's not like you're a helpless victim, but I understand that people who have no sense of agency, who seem to have no ability to build anything in their life or unable to maintain connections to family and friends, right? They're going to be very quick to blame their troubles on forces outside themselves. Back to the new L. Reeves book. Evan McLaren, right? Remember Richard Spencer's assistant, the director of the National Policy Institute, Richard Spencer's institute, spent a decade in white nationalism before coming to the realization he'd been a fool. Right? But there were reasons he got into this. Right? It wasn't wise, smart, connected, happy, successful people who were going into these crazy extreme movements. Right? It was people who were losing at life, who wanted to continue losing at life. 2022, Evan McLaren posted a statement online saying, "My revulsion for conservatism and the political right is total. I reject and disavow my past actions, views, and associations." He apologized for what he'd done, said he didn't expect to be forgiven. In conversations with me, he was unsparing. The movement was toxic and destructive and ruined people's lives. Yeah, but if you weren't also toxic and destructive and capable and eager to ruin other people's lives, you wouldn't have joined the movement in the first place. He met many people he thought who would have serious psychological problems if they weren't involved in it. They'd had serious psychological problems while they were in it, and you had to have serious psychological problems to maintain connection to it, right? It was your serious psychological problems that drove you into this toxic waste dump. Right? When I was out there being promiscuous in my 20s and 30s, who was I being promiscuous with? Being promiscuous with other people who was equally damaged as myself. Okay, this is pretty funny. Let me play this girl.
It's obvious they don't want us to talk about the facts.
I'm voting for her because he's going to strip all of our rights away as a woman. I can do that as a mom and a dad. What rights, babe? What rights? He was already president, and how many rights did you lose? 0. He's trying to protect women's rights. What do you think it is when we have men in women's sports? We have men in our personal spaces. What do you think it is when dangerous men come over the border? That's what protecting women and children is.
Emily Wilson, host of Emily Saves America, is here. Emily, we are going to make you our female interpreter. And if you could just share with us why women are somehow just attracted to Kamala Harris. Is she a girl's girl or something?
Look, I hate to say it, but we're here to have real conversations. She's a woman. She's a woman of color. She's a lot younger. She's a Democrat. They'll support her for just that alone. But not only that, she's on social media aggressively. And on top of that, she seems very relatable. Granted, I don't want the president of the United States to be relatable and some girl that I'm going to go have cocktails with and cackle like a hyena all night. But the thing is, she is relatable. The fact that she's like funny and she's loose about it, and Republicans don't like it, but the young voters and women, they do like it.
That was depressing, Emily. That made a lot of sense, and now I'm scared. So that doesn't even really matter, her policy. Besides abortion, Trump's a dictator, and let's go have Chardonnay and watch TV. Is that what we're doing here?
Look, I've seen tens of thousands of these videos, and all they talk about is what I just stated. I have not heard one person, and especially a woman, talk about her policies. The thing is, I don't think they know her policies. If they did, I don't think they would agree so much. But you realize we're going against a party that is completely brainwashed, and it's up to us to try to help unbrainwash these women. Because policy-wise, what she does actually puts women in a lot of danger, and Trump wants to protect women. But yeah, that's kind of what we're going against currently right now.
Can you unbrainwash the women? Because I don't think I should be the one to do the unbrainwashing of the women of America. I think you might have a better face for that.
Look, I hate to... Well, that's the thing. I hate to say it, but these, a lot of women have been watching two old white men on TV argue back and forth about politics for a long time, and now they're seeing a woman that, they can see themselves in and relate to, so they're really excited. But the thing we need to do is fight the propaganda with information. We need to be like, actually, a lot of these things put you in danger, and on top of that, Trump already said he's not doing an abortion ban, so the one thing that they fight for and care about, they really don't have to worry about.
Does information work? I'm getting the feeling that information might not even be worth it Because it looks like it's an identity play. What if they were somehow turned off by Kamala? What if they found out that she's a fraud, that she's a phony, she's a backstabber, that she's selfish, that she's all about herself and not you? Does that play into it at all?
Look, honestly, I hate to say it, but her party, she's got a party behind her that will support her, I think, no matter what she does. I think the only thing we can do moving forward is Republicans need to get on social media, they need to get on TikTok, and they need to start exposing her for who she is and showing that actually Trump wants to protect women and children. And that's the most important thing here.
All right, we need women going after Kamala Harris and telling the truth about her. All right, well, it's going to be a close election, I just found out. Thanks, Emily. Democrats' newest attack on Republicans? Weird. But isn't being weird cool? They told us it was cool. Look at Johnny. He's the weirdest one we have here. Watch.
What does it mean to be weird?
Like a vibe. Everyone's weird. You're unique. I'm sitting in the park on TV right now, and I'm dripping sweat because I ran 6 blocks. So I'd say that's pretty weird. Just kind of do your own thing, like dancing.
What are your dance moves? Being weird, is it a good thing, a bad thing?
It's good.
I just think it's fun.
Being weird is cool.
You don't want to be boring, so honestly, I think it's a good thing.
Democrats are pretty weird.
There is that.
What is the weirdest thing you've ever seen?
My ex-boyfriend, go crazy and almost run me over.
Why do you do that?
It was over a popsicle, so that's kind of odd.
A man on the subway.
I told you not to do that.
Look, it was the C train at night. I didn't think anyone would see.
A homeless person asked me for,
Okay, back to the new El Reeve book about being a black-pilled. How the black-pilled alt-right have taken over America. Sometimes when you hate something so much, you're so motivated that you'll make these connections and they might be correct almost despite your motivations, Richard Spencer told me. He was talking about a rival white nationalist, Greg Johnson, who he thought was a vicious gossip. They'd feuded for years, but his rival had once accused him of auditioning to be on the Kremlin's payroll, and years later, Richard Spencer admitted that, in retrospect, that catty bitch was onto something. It was March 2022. I'd called Richard about the divide among white nationalists over which side to support in Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I wanted the lay of the land, but Spencer kept talking about himself. I'd first spoken to Richard Spencer by phone in 2016 when he was one of the few willing to be associated with the alt-right by name and on the record. Spencer said he was a narcissist, but this made talking to him easier because he felt no shame, so he didn't conceal his motivations. It also meant he often failed to notice telling details about other people and why they did what they did, because his attention was elsewhere on himself. He'd continued to answer my questions in all the years since, as the fortunes of the alt-right rose and fell, and so did his. There were times he got so lost in his own monologue that if I interjected an aha to show I was listening, he sounded startled, as if he had forgotten someone was on the other side of the phone call. Russia found the far-right activists useful in the United States and Europe. Russia cultivated relationships with them both online and in real life. Russian trolls used fake social media accounts and fake news sites to inflame racial tensions and stage protests. State-controlled TV network RT had interviewed as experts a variety of extremists, including Richard Spencer himself. Maria Butina had become intimately close with conservative activists, particularly in the National Rifle Association, before she was convicted in 2018 of acting as an unregistered foreign agent on behalf of Russia. Richard Spencer was in a mood to reflect on his marriage in a way he hadn't been before. All these things I overlooked. You look back now and it's like, holy heck, she was trying to do something. Talked about marrying his first wife as a Russian woman. He admitted he'd adopted some of his Russian wife's views as his own, but he had thought he was too smart to get played by the Kremlin. I feel like I am an unrecruitable asset. If someone suggests something to me, that makes me almost skeptical. I march to the beat of my own drum. Isn't it much more easy to work with dumb people who are easily suggestible? Richard Spencer and his Russian wife, Kupriyanova, met on Facebook in 2009, married the next year. He thought she was very smart, but that he was way smarter. Most people who've met them both told me it was actually the other way around, that she, instead, was the smarter one. Each told me they suspected the other was suffering from a personality disorder. They'd surreptitiously recorded each other during fights. Kuprianova accused Richard Spencer of physical and emotional abuse. They fought over child support. Kuprianova's first lawyer withdrew from the case because of your desire for vengeance and taking down the Spencer family. Some of Richard Spencer's lawyers dropped him too. She says that Richard came across as a shy and nerdy grad student. The way he comes across in his John Travolta suits, this really cheesy, sometimes scary, but very extroverted very extroverted person in the last couple of years, that would have been such a turnoff for me. He knew all these obscure black and white Soviet films. She thought it was cool that he liked what she liked. Looking back, she says it was all a manipulation, just narcissistic love bombing. He was flooding the zone with these references to impress her, to drown any second thoughts she might have with affection and attention. She didn't see this coming, she says, this obsession with race and eugenics. When they met, Richard Spencer was a libertarian. He'd had a Jewish mentor, Paul Gottfried, I think, but Paul Gottfried was never Richard's mentor. And he had dated an Asian American woman. He told her the political book that had influenced him the most was by Justin Raimondo, a gay Latino anti-war activist. She explained it the same way to the Huffington Post. I didn't understand the nuances of American politics. I knew he was conservative, but Richard Spencer did not have the self-control to match his ambition. When Kuprianova compared his personality to historic political figures, they were more motivated, more organized, more Machiavellian than he was. Richard Spencer made an ideal spokesman. He didn't look like a guy who had nothing in his life to be proud of, so he was proud of being white. In crowds, he could project confidence and self-control. That facade faded over time and under pressure. In a smaller group, he could be awkward and self-conscious and failed to read the room. He once walked into an interview in a hotel room and asked my producer for a cigarette, as if he could smoke in a hotel, and as if he could smoke in the interview like it was the 1950s. He told me he can't stand it when people don't like him. The chat says attacking Kamala as a woman will backfire. Yeah, there's no reason to attack Kamala Harris as a woman, as a black, as a whatever, Indian American. There's no reason to attack her on that. Richard Spencer says, I've always been very lonely. As a child, he never felt like he was part of the world around him. He didn't connect with other kids. Maybe they could sense, even back then, that he felt superior to them. Richard Spencer was not good at anything, not math, not English, not sports. He was awkward and goofy. Middle school, his teachers told his parents he wouldn't be able to go to college because I was almost retarded because of my dyslexia. In therapy for dyslexia, Richard Spencer listened to Mozart, recorded himself repeating words, then played them back over and over again. He thought it rewired his brain. By the end of high school, he'd caught up to the other kids in math and sports. He did well on the SAT, but it was not enough. He did not get into Princeton. It stung, even if he knew it was embarrassing to be stung by it. Richard Spencer asked me once why the journalist who wrote about him was so desperate to figure out his origin story. I told him it was probably because the popular image of a racist was a broken-down old man in an Alabama trailer park, but he was upper middle class. Most elite journalists were upper middle class, so they were confused why someone like them would do what he had done. He paused for a second and then said it was because he did not get into Princeton. First time Matt Heimbach met Richard Spencer was at a hotel room party after a conference. Some guys were leaving on a booze run. Richard Spencer requested bourbon or whiskey. They brought back Mad Dog, and they were partying in the room when Richard Spencer returned. He looked disgusted and asked, did you get me my whiskey? They told him to drink beer like a real man. He started to throw a hissy fit. One of the guys was like, Richard, go in the hallway. 10 seconds later, we go outside. Richard had been lifted off his feet. He's being slammed into the wall by a drunken college white nationalist going, you drink what we give you, Richard. Heimbach remembers Richard Spencer squealing, put me down. He seemed to, Heimbach cherished the memory. Richard Spencer was always searching for a donor. He wanted to run a think tank. He wanted to publish essays, do research, and he wanted someone to pay for it who was not his mother. Bill Regnery had founded the National Policy Institute, a white nationalist think tank, a few years earlier as a vehicle for a friend who'd since died. Spencer thought it was an empty shell. After exchanging emails, Richard Spencer flew to Florida, made his pitch in January 2011. Bill Regnery made Richard Spencer the head of NPI and its sister organization, Washington Summit Publishers. Regnery had a lot of money, but he didn't want to dump most of it into NPI. Instead, he urged Richard Spencer to find other external sources of funding. Richard Spencer brought Kuprianova to an event. She knew that her husband wasn't there to celebrate Charles Murray. He talked about other older men, she said, and the possibility that they would leave him a large donation in their wills. Walter Kistler was a prime example. The guy is in his 90s, so God knows about his state of mind. They did see Charles Murray briefly, but she thought that Charles Murray snubbed Richard. Even so, they had a great time partying with all these Seattle society hags. He felt momentum, like things were coming together. I was flying high. I was like, we're going to have a billionaire. We're going to have a billionaire. Spencer got a contract with William Kistler to write his autobiography. When Charles Murray read it, he was appalled, strongly urged William Kistler not to publish it. Richard Spencer insisted, hey, I've got a contract here. Richard was eventually offered a $50,000 kill fee not to publish the book. He took it. He bragged to his wife that he had played hardball with this man in his 90s and won. Greg Johnson runs Countercurrents. He noticed an element of drama that most of the mainstream media coverage barely touched. The Russian angle leads to the most plausible hypothesis for why this conference was shut down, talking about the Richard Spencer conference in Hungary in 2015. The NPI and Radix magazine are Russia propaganda organs. Dugin, the chief speaker, is an ideologue of Russian chauvinism and an apologist for Stalin. Jobbik, which was also associated with the conference, is pro-Russia, which is rather tricky in a country like Hungary, invaded twice by Russia in the last century. Greg Johnson wrote he didn't like Richard Spencer's new pro-Russia direction. He was abandoning ethno-nationalism and turned into an apologist for Dugin and reactionary Russian chauvinism. Spencer created the Alternative Right website in 2010, ran it with a couple of writers, then he got mad at the writers and killed the site. Wanted to focus on his pretentious journal Radix and be the next Nietzsche. But the term alt-right was catchy, one white nationalist wrote, because it signaled distance from mainstream conservatism without endorsing National Socialism or white nationalism. When Richard Spencer finally realized the alt-right wave was swelling, he tried to surf it because he was willing to use his real name when few others would. He became the face of the alt-right by default. Kuprianova, his wife, thought Richard Spencer enjoyed the negative attention because it was attention, and that's what he wanted most, attention. He wanted to be feared. He wanted to feel like an alpha.
Monologue in a minute, but first, joining us now with the very latest details of this prisoner exchange that resulted in the release of these 4 American
places.
Okay, I'll keep an eye on the news here. Back to this new book by El Reeve. So Kuprianova, Richard Spencer's wife, thought that he had no sense of self without a reaction from others. That's kind of a definition of narcissist, when you have no sense of self without getting reactions from others. People called her Richard Spencer's beard, and she was in a way, not to make him look straight, but to make him look like he had it together. She felt forced into a role of homemaker, which she resented because she lived abroad and she'd spoken 3 languages. He told her, you make me look normal. Richard Spencer was a drawer. He shapeshifted to fit the desires of the people around him. Kuprianova watched her husband morph into this flashy, cheesy alpha persona. When people called him chubby on the internet, he went on a diet and ate only 1 meal a day. And they started to call him gay. All of a sudden, these groupies appear, proving to the outside world that he's not gay. Samantha Froelich. So she was on ABC 2020 talking about how she gotten into the alt-right and then left it. She got into Identity Europa. So Richard Spencer and Samantha Froelich were spotted leaving the after party at Charlottesville 1.0. Gossip quickly spread. Identity Europa investigated her. Both she and Spencer denied they'd done anything than talk, but they had hooked up. Kuprianova was pregnant with Richard Spencer's second child. Froelich heard from another guy who went by Eli Mosley, who was interested in her. Eli has claimed me, she texted Spencer. Did he inform you of his decision or full white Sharia? Spencer asked. She said, I guess white Sharia. Within a few weeks, Mosley was doxxed. His real name was Elliot Klein. He was pudgy with a red beard and his hair cut like Richard Spencer's. He looked like a potato. Froelich offered him a place to stay for a while. He never left. He wouldn't take a normal job. She made the money working at a restaurant. The text showed they liked the idea of being a power couple in the alt-right. Throughout the summer of 2018, Richard Spencer felt euphoric. He was at the height of his power within the alt-right. He bragged to Samantha Froelich that people worshipped him like a god. She watched the teenagers in awe of him at the Nazi parties. He told her he was the L. Ron Hubbard of the alt-right, that he was building a new religion. Can't go back, Richard Spencer told me later. Just wish I could have asked myself, do you even like these guys? Richard, I know how you feel about ugly people. Back in Montana, Richard's wife, Kuprianova, looked at the photos posted online of the crowd Richard Spencer was hanging around. The elderly men in tweed were gone. Now there were younger, rougher-looking guys. Every 6 months, there'd be someone new, served as his right-hand man, now as Elliot Klein. He was named as Identity Europa's public representative, Charlottesville 2.0. He also served as Spencer's representative for its planning. Klein texted Richard Spencer, "This is going to be a violent summer," talking about the summer of 2018. Eli Mosley, right, Elliot Klein had a reputation as a clout chaser and a name dropper. He saw Richard Spencer as a useful tool. Klein thought that he was smarter and better. Told Samantha Froelich he needed to work out more to prepare for racial holy war. He was building a militia for Richard Spencer. He would lead them to victory, and then he would depose Richard Spencer. Once a white ethno-state was established, Richard Spencer would be the first against the wall, Samantha Froelich said. When a lawyer asked her to state explicitly what that meant that Eli Mosley said he would put Richard Spencer against a wall and shoot him dead. Richard Spencer thought these guys loved him because he was great, not because they wanted to establish a base of power before stomping on his face to seize the crown. Later, Richard Spencer said, this movement is magnetized to shit. Any form of shit it sees, it wants to go die on that hill. It's just said, oh, look, more shit. Let's go involve ourselves. Let's endorse it. It's just so insane. All right, that's from the new El Reeve book called Black Pill. All right, let's get a little burst here from Sean Hannity.
3 years, but I'm not dragging you into that, Jackie. I'm glad our Americans are going to be home. Tonight, state-run media, the mob is trying to do their very best to manufacture enthusiasm for Kamala Harris, keep the honeymoon alive as long as they can. There are countless glowing articles about her so-called historic campaign. And for the record, I did call this the week after that debate in an article I put on FoxNews.com, Hannity.com. I said, if they ever replace Joe, whoever they replace him with is going to be hailed as...
Kip, what's going on, man?
Hey, my friend, you started out today talking about how important it is for people to have an honest relationship with himself, you know?
Yeah.
And I believe, was it Shakespeare said, to thine own self be true?
Yeah.
But,
have self-respect. Build your self-respect.
Right. Well, one of the things about the unique relationship I had growing up was that I was around for kind of like the early formation of rap. And there was actually real genius in some of those lyrics. Now, it may have been few and far between, but it was there. So I just wanted to share with you the opening verse of a song from that Houdini had from 1985. It was they had an album called Back in Black that I thought the whole album was good, but they had one song on there called Last Night I Had a Long Talk with Myself. So it starts off with I guess you'd say the hook of last night I had a long talk with myself 4 times. But then he says, yes, in case you want to know what I'm talking about, last night I finally had to have it out. I sat down with myself and set myself straight because this is one problem that couldn't wait. I tried to be cool, but things had gone too far. I said to myself, who do you think you are? Then a voice answered back that sounded just like mine. And to top it all off, it also rhymed. It said, this is your conscience. This is your pride. These are all the things that you've been trying to hide. You can run and hide from everyone else, but you see, you can't hide from yourself. So take my advice and give it some thought. You better change your ways because life's too short. So tomorrow I plan to be a brand new guy. And you want to know the deal? I'll tell you why. Last night I had a long talk with myself. So you see, there's some genius in some of those lyrics, even though 99% of them are garbage. You agree?
Yeah, that sounds right to me. It's not my favorite musical medium, but I'm sure there's excellence in there.
Right. And I just wanted to share that I really didn't have nothing to add about Richard Spencer, and you've really done a good job covering Kamala. I was just going to tell you one quick story and then get out of your hair. My better half back in the 90s, we were watching movies one weekend, and she said, that guy right there, we were watching some movie called Against the Wall or Against the Odds or something. And she said, that guy, he looks like your loan officer, the weird one. And I said, you mean my Yale graduate? I said, you better leave Bart Whiteman alone. I was like, I've only had one Yale graduate ever work for me, and he's it. So anyway, we laughed about it. Maybe about a week or so later, we were watching another movie. This one was called The Firm. And there was a character called Dutch that showed up in the film. And she said, my God, again, it looks like you're a Yale graduate that writes and reads in Arabic, that always sends those faxes from the office. I said, yeah, I'm going to have to tell him at the office. I'm going to have to tell him that he's got a twin in Hollywood. So on Monday, I told him, I saw him in the hallway, and I said, man, I watched a couple of movies the last couple of weeks. You've got a twin in Hollywood. I was like, the movie The Firm, have you ever seen it? He said, seen it. I was in it. I was like, no shit. So it blew my mind, because he strikes me as a he's no longer with us, but he struck me as a Duvid type of character, you know, was kind of marching to the beat of his own drum. But I could see that he was a genius, you know what I mean? So I gave him a real wide berth. And between you and me, he never made Loan Officer of the Month or anything like that. But he was I don't know, you call them kindred spirits. You know, I could see, because I was always a little bit weird like that myself. And, if I hadn't had a couple of sisters or whatever, I would have ended up, like him, just a little bit like that. But it's just weird. You see somebody, as to me, he was just a commissioned loan officer that had come over from Chase, when they had a managerial change. And I had not associated him with much more than that, other than the fact that it was that him being a Yale graduate. I thought that was kind of weird. And the fact that he spoke and wrote in all these strange languages, I thought that was weird. But yeah, to find out he was Hollywood.
And of course, what was his name?
Bart Whiteman, like white man, just slammed together into one word.
Okay, he died in 2006.
Okay, yeah, he had apparently been in a handful of movies or whatever, and I think the way he described it, maybe he had a friend, that was a director or something. So anyway, it's just you were talking about kind of like people wind up in weird places or whatever, but
yes,
he served him well. He might have been following some woman that he loved, and the only thing I got out of him was maybe he was in the DC art scene. And so I just put two and two together and figured he was probably chasing some woman, and she must be from here. And so he was, he lived here then. So anyway, I just thought that was interesting how, people live. In the case of Bart Whiteman, sound like he lived 3 or 4 lives, along the way. But anyway, that's really about all I had. I didn't want to take up too much of you.
Thanks,
all right.
Kip.
See you.
Thanks, bro. Take care, bro. Okay, talk to you later. Okay, let's get back to Elle Reeve's new book, Black Pill, and talking about she had many interviews with Richard Spencer, and she's got, I think, pretty telling portrait of him. The alt-right was a chic magnet because some people were attracted to it, not despite the stigma around it, but because of the stigma. It was bad, made people angry, especially their parents. Richard Spencer imagined himself as the next Nietzsche, but instead he was the next Marilyn Manson. After Samantha Froelich invited Richard Spencer to the alt-right Discord server, he texted her, wow, this forum is insane. He asked if someone could create an elite room with no shitposting, and she replied, you are Richard Spencer. All you need to do is demand it and say who you want in, and it is yours. He declined. It's better to have intermediaries like you than for me to simply demand stuff. And then Elle Reeve writes about Christopher Cantwell. He was the most emotionally volatile person I have ever met. All right, that's a pretty good description. All right, let's check out the chat. What is Apolloism? Yeah, that's Richard Spencer's new religion, his new way to make himself great. And this religion is better than the others because I couldn't make the case for it. It's like a polite version of National Socialism. So if you love National Socialism, you'll love Apolloism. So Christopher Cantwell, the most emotionally volatile person I have ever met, man or woman, adult or baby. Good description. In a few days, he would tell me, I find myself in tears more often than a man my age should. So as a man of reason, he framed his emotions like anger as a rational response to the news. His voice got higher and he spoke faster. Even as he insisted, he was genetically predisposed to appreciating the cold, hard facts of capitalism. He wasn't going to Charlottesville to debate UVA, University of Virginia, students about public policy. He was going to create a massive spectacle to provoke an emotional response, to make his enemies afraid, and to make young white guys think he looked cool. In the park, Robert Amador Ray was filming the scene for the Daily Stormer. Amador had a gray wizard beard, a thin braid down his back, and a criminal record that began with a 1990 arrest in Dallas for illegally selling an interracial porno tape called Three-Way Cum. Oh, I think that's a very reductive way of summing up that epic movie as interracial porno tape. Matt Parrott did not eat right. Matt Parrott did not exercise. Most of the time, Matt Parrott tried to forget he had a physical body. There were people eager to punch a Nazi in the face. He was a soft target. But Matt Parrott waded through the Charlottesville brawl unpunched. People who wanted to fight were high on adrenaline, and their eyes were searching for other fighters. There were about half a dozen guys, Elliot Klein, Nathan D'Amigo, Jason Kessler, and Richard Spencer. They asked one another, what should we do? What should we say? Richard Spencer stood to address his men. They'd been drinking, and when Spencer began ranting, someone in the room was taping. And what did they tape?
I am so mad. I am so fucking mad at these people. They don't do this to fucking me. We're gonna fucking ritualistically humiliate them. I am coming back here every fucking weekend if I have to. Like, this is never over. I win, they fucking lose. That's how the world fucking works. Little fucking kites. They get ruled by people like me. Little fucking octoroons. My ancestors fucking enslaved those pieces of fucking shit. We're gonna win. I rule the fucking world. Those pieces of shit get ruled by people like me. They look up and see a face like mine looking down at them. That's how the fucking world works. We are gonna destroy this fucking town.
There's no pretense of irony or that this was one big cosmic joke or that he simply wanted open debate among reasonable people. Richard Spencer sounded sweaty and crazy. A couple of guys clapped lightly and one offered a soft yeah. But right there in that room, Richard Spencer lost the movement. Evan McLaren, who was Richard Spencer's loyal right-hand man, could feel the other guys turn on their icon. McLaren felt a shift in himself too. Maybe it had not been a good idea to make peace with Richard Spencer's narcissism. So many people had been implicated in so much damage, dozens were bloody, 3 were dead, but all Richard Spencer cared about was his wounded pride. Long after he'd quit the movement and apologized and moved across the Atlantic Ocean, Evan McLaren smiled as he quoted the rant from memory. They don't do this to me. Richard Spencer's greatest flaw in its purest expression at the climax of the disaster it created had been a lot like watching a villain's final monologue in a play. Unite the Right's attendees had been so proud to show their faces in public, but activists methodically identified them one by one, published their names on social media. They became pariahs in their towns or colleges and even their families. They were fired from their jobs. They were kicked off social media accounts so they couldn't defend themselves, reach new supporters. I learned a lot about Christopher Cantwell just by standing in his apartment, saying nothing as our crew set up our interview. His home was hostile to the human psyche. Every corner was stacked with some kind of object for self-improvement. Weights, protein powder, supplements, niche kitchen appliances. He'd printed out signs on computer paper in big, bold text that read, "Stop saying the F word." And he taped them under his television, by his bathroom mirror, on his fridge. The windows were covered with blackout curtains. He was slamming sugar-free Red Bulls and taking huge rips from a vape. When I asked how he slept at night, he leaned his head back, his voice tight as he held the smoke in his lungs, and then finally said, "It's a struggle." That night, he'd gotten home from Charlottesville. He said he'd noticed a big bottle of whiskey on a shelf. He took it down, drank it till he blacked out. All he remembered was the hangover the next day. After that lapse, he was trying to control his alcoholism. Matt Heimbach and Matt Parrott found themselves in a love triangle. Heimbach was having an affair with Matt Parrott's third wife, Jessica. The Parrotts had just had their first child, a girl. Heimbach was married to Matt Parrott's stepdaughter, Brooke. They had 2 small boys. This meant Heimbach was having an affair with a woman who was both his best friend's wife and his wife's stepmom. Heimbach and Brooke were living in a trailer on Matt Parrott's property in Indiana. The affair ended, but in early March, according to a police report, Jessica and Brooke decided to test Matt Heimbach's commitment to ending the relationship. Was it really over? They made a plan. Jessica would try to seduce Heimbach, and Brooke and Parrott would film through a window outside. In one sense, it worked. Heimbach responded to Jessica's romantic overtures. But as Jessica and Heimbach began to get physical, Brooke got upset and ran away. Parrott fell through the box he was standing on. Then Parrott ran around the home and confronted Heimbach. He ordered his best friend to leave his property, jabbing Heimbach in the chest with his finger. Heimbach put Matt Parrott in a headlock and choked him out. When Parrott came to, Jessica was standing over him. He ran into the house and Heimbach entered. Parrott demanded Heimbach leave, and when he didn't, Parrott threw a chair at Heimbach. Heimbach choked him out again. When Parrott got himself together, he grabbed his 4-month-old daughter, ran to Walmart, and called the cops. When police arrived, they heard Heimbach yelling at Brooke to tell the cops everything was fine and asked them to leave. She refused. Heimbach kicked a wall, grabbed Brooke's cheeks, and pushed her on the bed. Cops entered, arrested Heimbach. Heimbach was already on probation for pushing a black woman at a Trump rally in 2016. Judge sentenced him to 38 days in jail for violating his probation. A few months later, Heimbach pled guilty to battery for attacking Matt Parrott. The divorce between Richard Spencer and, is it Anna Kuprianovas, cost her $40,000 in legal fees. Richard Spencer was held in contempt of court for failing to pay $60,000 to the court. The court-appointed investigator who determined the best custody arrangement, multiple third parties in the case, said they thought both Spencer and Kuprianova acted irrationally. Kuprianova originally decided to move to Winnipeg to be near her parents, but in April 2019, she changed her mind. She decided to stay in Whitefish. She and Richard Spencer both live in the same mountain town of 8,500 people. Matt Parrott still lives in Indiana, the same town where he grew up with his 3 kids and his 4th wife. Now 10 years since he's met Matt Heimbach, who now lived far away with his own 2 children. A few weeks earlier, they'd gotten on the phone to gossip about the movement, and Heimbach reflected, "We got mixed up with the most despicable, evil people in America." Parrott agreed, but it was worse. "We did, bro. We followed these guys into battle." Matt Heimbach found a job. They knew that eventually someone would recognize him and he'd be fired again. He accepted that the decisions he made at age 19 meant he might be stuck in this cycle for the rest of his life. Required some finesse in his personal life, he said. I have to begin every first date with, "By the way, you should know." You know how not sexy that is to be like, "You should read my Wikipedia page before our second date." In 2022, Richard Spencer told me he was no longer a white nationalist. "I care about civilization more than race," he said. He hadn't quit trying to be a public figure, tweeting his commentary on politics and old far-right rivals. The most attention he'd gotten in years came with the revelation that he listed his political affiliation as moderate in his Bumble profile, a dating app whose best-known rule is that women speak first. Spencer would only take limited accountability for his starring role in The Summer of Hate 2018. Said during the Charlottesville trial that he'd been slumming it by hanging out with the alt-right. Later told me that in 2016 and 2017 he was the most racist he'd ever been, and that he'd felt pressure to be the most far-right guy in the room. But at his core, he was who he was. Spencer told me he liked Christian nationalism. He thought associating the religion with the mania of QAnon would help destroy it. Oh, he liked it because he thought it could be destroyed. I hate Christianity," Spencer said. "I hate Jesus Christ. I would have oppressed it. I know that I come from Roman blood, the kind of people who would crucify Jesus, who would go in and knock down your stupid temple. That's who I am, L. In case there's any ambiguity about the person I am, that is the type of person I am." Richard Spencer still wanted to be the guy, but he was now thinking bigger than politics. He turned his energy to building a cult of Apollo, thought his new religion would eventually take down Christianity, and with it, its slave morality, which held that humility and obedience were good and power and wealth were bad. Richard Spencer's Apolloism cult would value strength, beauty, and intellect. Everyone's like, "We need more democracy, we need more rights." What are you talking about? We've had more democracy and liberalism and all this Christian Semitic stuff. We have more of that than we've ever had. How many Abrahamics are there on the planet? 5 billion? We've tried that. He wanted humanity to make a covenant with a better god like Zeus. As for the race stuff, Richard Spencer said you just have to move past it. All right, let's get a little bit more from the Israel commentary that I've been playing the last 2 days with Michael Duran and Gary Tao.
Position, they climb up a tree. So I'm not sure this is the time. I don't contest your general estimation that what happened here to Israel is something Israel cannot acquiesce to. But the question is, do you think that this will ignite the war that we are all thinking about?
Well, we're on. If I have to bet, I bet it will not. But this isn't something that I'm going to say with a lot of confidence because the game that the Iranians and Hezbollah are playing is a very, very dangerous game, and they're in this to win it. These are not symbolic attacks. They understand that they are contesting territory in the north, that they're making it intolerable for people to live there, that a lot of people will, if there's a ceasefire tomorrow, a lot of people are not going to go resume their lives in the north because they know that Hezbollah at the drop of a hat can resume the attacks if it wants. So this is a major achievement. A major military achievement to make the life in the north of Israel insecure. That's an achievement, and they want to end the war with that achievement in their pocket. That's what I'm saying.
And that's impossible.
Okay, I'll talk to you.